In the heart of South America, where the mountains rose high and the streets of the old city baked under the unforgiving sun, Alejandro Marquez lived in a mansion of glass and marble. He was the son of a wealthy family whose fortune had been built on generations of land, coffee plantations, and banking power. From his balcony, he could see the whole city spread beneath him like a map of possibilities, though in truth he rarely noticed anything beyond the circles of wealth where he moved so easily. Women in designer dresses courted his attention at social galas. Businessmen sought his handshake. Politicians whispered his name with respect. Yet beneath the expensive suits and inherited confidence, Alejandro carried an emptiness he could not explain, a hollow space he tried to fill with cars, travels, and endless nights of champagne. In another part of the same city, on the other side of the river, where houses leaned into each other like exhausted workers, lived Camila Herrera. She was 19, the daughter of a laundress who had died young, and a father who had disappeared in search of work years ago, leaving Camila to care for her younger siblings. She worked as a cleaning girl in offices and sometimes in the homes of the wealthy, scrubbing marble floors she could never dream of owning, polishing silver she would never taste food from, washing linens softer than anything she had ever slept in. Her hands were rough with soap and chemicals, but her eyes were bright, and sometimes when she looked out at the horizon, she imagined another life, one where she could study, sing, or perhaps simply live without fear of rent collectors at the door. Fate, with its cruel sense of irony, arranged their meeting on an ordinary morning. Camila had been sent by an agency to clean Alejandro's mansion, replacing the regular maid who had fallen ill. She entered the vast house nervously, carrying her bucket and cloth, and when she looked up the marble staircase, she saw him descending, tall, elegant, every inch the heir to a fortune. Alejandro barely noticed her at first, accustomed to staff moving silently around his life. But something about the way she stood, clutching her bucket with dignity, eyes neither lowered nor pleading, made him pause. Their gazes met. For Alejandro, it was as if the silence around him cracked open. For Camila, it was a moment she would replay endlessly, the rich man whose name filled newspapers looking at her as though she were not invisible. Days passed, and Alejandro found excuses to speak to her, asking her name, her story, listening with a fascination he had never felt at banquets or boardrooms. Camila resisted at first, suspicious of his curiosity, aware of the gulf that separated them. But slowly, his persistence melted her fear. He spoke gently, asked questions about her siblings, her dreams, her struggles. She discovered that beneath his polished exterior, there was a loneliness she recognized, a hunger for something real. Their conversations grew longer, turning into stolen moments in the kitchen, in the garden, until Alejandro realized he was thinking of her constantly. When he finally confessed that he felt something more than curiosity, Camila trembled, torn between fear and the secret longing she had buried all her life. Against every instinct, she allowed herself to believe. They began meeting in secret. Alejandro would drive to the poorer districts late at night, leaving his car far from her street so no one would notice, and they would walk under the shadows of broken street lamps, talking for hours. He told her she was the first person who made him feel alive, unchained from the expectations of wealth. She told him he was the first man who had ever seen her as more than cheap labor. Love bloomed like a forbidden flower, fragile but intoxicating. They kissed under the jacaranda trees when the blossoms fell purple on the ground. They whispered promises in abandoned courtyards. They dreamed of a life where money and class would mean nothing. But the world is not kind to such dreams. Rumors began to spread. A neighbor saw Alejandro's car near Camila's home. A gossiping servant whispered to another, and soon whispers reached the Marquez household. His mother, Doña Isabel, confronted him with icy fury, reminding him of his duty to marry within their class, to strengthen alliances, not to disgrace the family with a cleaning girl. His father, stern and controlling, threatened to cut him off from the inheritance if he continued. Alejandro defied them, insisting his love was not negotiable, but every word only deepened their anger. Camila, meanwhile, felt the pressure of her neighborhood. Women muttered that she was foolish. Men warned her that rich men used poor girls and then discarded them. Her siblings grew anxious as neighbors whispered that she was reaching too high, that her scandal would ruin them all. The strain grew unbearable. One evening, Alejandro begged her to run away with him, to leave behind the city and its judgment, to start anew in another place where no one knew their names. Camila longed to say yes, to imagine a future untainted by wealth and poverty, but the weight of responsibility crushed her. She could not abandon her siblings. She could not leave behind the fragile roof that barely sheltered them. Tears streamed down her face as she told him it was impossible. Alejandro promised he would find a way, but already the walls of their separate worlds were closing in. His parents arranged for him to meet the daughter of a powerful politician, a match that would secure influence and wealth. He attended the dinner reluctantly, but when photos of him beside the elegant young woman appeared in society magazines, Camila saw them and felt her heart break. Though he had not touched the other woman, the image was enough to poison the fragile trust between them. When Alejandro tried to explain, Camila turned away, wounded, telling him that love between their worlds could never survive. He begged, but she pulled free, her dignity the only shield she had left. From that night, they drifted apart, not by choice, but by the relentless tide of society. Alejandro was dragged deeper into the expectations of his family, engaged eventually to the politician's daughter. Camila returned to her cleaning jobs, her hands rougher, her eyes older. Yet both carried the ghost of what they had shared, a flame that never truly died. Years later, on a rainy afternoon, Alejandro saw her again. She was leaving an office building where she still cleaned, her clothes worn, her hair tied back. But her presence struck him like a blow. He called her name. She froze, then turned, and for a moment they simply stared, all the years of longing and pain flooding between them. He wanted to run to her, to throw away everything, but she shook her head slowly, tears mixing with the rain. "It's too late," she whispered. His wife was waiting in a car behind him, her jewels flashing, her gaze suspicious. Camila's siblings now depended on her more than ever, her life bound by responsibilities she could not abandon. They had loved, they had dreamed, but the world had demanded a price too high. As she walked away, Alejandro felt a hollow tear inside his chest, a wound that would never heal. Camila returned to her small home, her heart heavy yet proud that she had not betrayed herself. That night she looked at the stars through the cracked window and thought of what might have been. Love had come to her like a storm, fierce and beautiful, but society had torn it apart, leaving only memories to ache in the silence. Alejandro lived on, wealthy, respected, his life polished for all to admire. But in the deepest hours of the night, when the city slept, he thought not of his empire or his wife, but of the girl with rough hands and bright eyes who had once shown him the meaning of love. He knew he would never feel such truth again.